Good evening and welcome to our webinar called Breaking Barriers Through Self-Advocacy. And I'm very proud to present this to you, to our colleagues, friends, family, and future friends we don't know yet. And so this is Michele Fuller, and I'm the owner and managing partner of the Michigan Law Center. And so, Lizzie, thanks. And so this is me. My practice focuses on special needs and elder law, specifically, but more special needs planning. And this is a little bit about me and who I am. And I'm very active in our legal community as well as the advocacy community for people with disabilities. I've written a ton of stuff, and I speak all over the country. And I get to meet really great people like Lauren Presutti, who we are happy to bring to you today. And so, next slide, Lizzie. And so helping us today is my really awesome Director of Education and Marketing. Her name is Lizzie Urban, and she's been with us for several years now, and she is fantastic. So that's who I'm talking to. And she's also somebody who you can call our office and speak with as well. And so these are our practice areas. We do estate planning, special needs planning, Medicaid planning, settlement planning, but everything that's really helping people protect their family. That's where we come in. Next slide. So what makes us different from other law firms? We really focus on families, protection of families through advocacy and planning. So that's estate planning, making sure it's updated. We have particular programs that are helpful to make sure families do that, and certainly helping people live their best lives. Next slide. So this is one of our publications that I'm really proud of. My husband and I are the co-authors, and this is all about administering the Michigan Special Needs Trust. And both professionals and lay people, this is one of the most important jobs that someone can have, and it requires a tremendous amount of expertise. There's a lot of complexity to being a trustee of a special needs trust, and so we wrote a guide to help people. And so it's available on Amazon as well through the law firm if you have any questions or wish to see a copy. Next. So why are we doing this? Well, first, we're just like you. Lauren and I balance work and life, our family. We all play a lot of roles in life. But one of the best things about my life is that I have a daughter with autism. And I've walked the walk with her and still do. She's 20 and thriving. And it's really been the passion and the catalyst behind our practice. And so with that, we got in touch with Lauren, and she's an extraordinary person. And Liz, you can go to the next slide. And we're so happy to introduce her today. She is a licensed psychotherapist, and she holds a bachelor's degree in sociology from CMU. Although I'm a Michigan State grad, she's a CMU grad, but we still get along. It's all good, right? So, and yeah. She's also incredibly smart. She has 2 graduate degrees in education and a master's degree in social work from Grand Valley State University, which my oldest son goes to as well. So go Lakers. And she works extensively with teens and adults in education settings, public agencies, nonprofits. She has a true passion for helping people. And if you haven't seen her Facebook posts every day, they are incredibly inspiring. They're little touches of inspiration and motivation every day. And so I encourage you to like her Facebook page, which is Lauren Presutti Counseling or Presutti Counseling. It's sign up for her newsletter. It's short and sweet, and just that little nudge that you might need every day. But the most extraordinary thing about Lauren is her intelligence, her drive, her warmth and understanding. And part of her life, though, is that she lives it from a wheelchair, and it is not a barrier to her. And I think she's just an extraordinary person and really inspiring. And so here she is today to talk about how to self-advocate And what's wonderful about her is that she does this for herself. She is living this in action. And I think she's just amazing. And so I'm so proud to introduce her to you today.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I'm so grateful to be here today. Thank you to everyone for joining us today. I'm really honored to be partnering with Michelle and Lizzie and the entire Michigan Law Center to share some information with you about self-advocacy. Like Michelle said, this has really always been a very strong part of my life because I have been using a wheelchair through my entire life. And I remember just growing up through elementary school and through the K-12 education system, I realized early on that I had to learn how to ask for help and I had to learn how to explain my needs to other people who maybe didn't always understand what my needs were. And I had to learn how to be a strong self advocate in order to live the best life that I can. And that's what really motivated me and inspired me to become a therapist so that I could specialize in working with people and families affected by disabilities so that they can live the best lives that they can. So, in my practice, I provide counseling for a lot of clinical issues like anxiety, depression, relationships, trauma, self image, and other concerns. But what I often notice when working with people with disabilities is that one of the biggest barriers for them is this inability or lack of experience with self advocacy. And so, what I mean by that is that for people that have unique circumstances, whether it's a disability or a learning difference, maybe a medical condition or a chronic illness, or some other type of neurotypical difference like autism, a lot of times they are subject to other people speaking for them. And these other people might be teachers, as they've grown up through school. I've certainly experienced that, or healthcare professionals, or leaders of nonprofits or other organizations that allocate resources, insurance providers, employers, sometimes even our own neighbors and friends. And sometimes people have really good intentions, but maybe they don't always understand the limitations or the circumstances that you face in your life. And you may experience feeling misunderstood or not getting the resources that you need or not being able to live the best life that you want to live regarding what your goals are, what your dreams are. And so that's why I want to provide some information today about what self advocacy really means, how to build or strengthen skills for self advocacy, and really why this is so important, right? Because if we're going to be, learning about this and really implementing it into our daily lives, it's really important, I think, to understand why it's important and why honing these skills can really go a long way. And I'll also touch on the relationship between self advocacy and positive mental health so that we can talk about some of the ways that you can reach those goals. And I hope that you'll find this information helpful. And I'm happy to answer questions following the webinar. We'll have time at the end for people to ask questions, and I'm hoping we'll be able to get some good answers to you and start your minds racing a little bit with ways that you can start being a stronger advocate in your own life. So this is a really good slide about, just what is self-advocacy. And there's a lot of different definitions in the literature. If you want to get super technical, I know sometimes I'm reading different articles or I'm looking at different research and self-advocacy will be defined in different ways. But generally speaking, I really like to think of self-advocacy in terms of learning how to speak up for yourself, learning how to be assertive when explaining what your needs are in order to obtain an accommodation or a resource. It's really about being able to make your own decisions about your own life. Self advocacy is about learning how to utilize information and resources to your advantage. knowing what your rights and responsibilities are, strategically using the support of other people to accomplish your goals. And honestly, one of the most important things that I think about when it comes to self-advocacy is not giving up, not backing down when faced with barriers. We all face barriers, whether you have a disability or not. We all have barriers in our lives. And when we approach those barriers with a fixed mindset of, oh, well, that's the way it is, I'm just going to have to deal with, that limitation, that can really prevent us from speaking up and advocating for ourselves and having that determined mindset of feeling like, okay, there is something that we can do. There is someone we can connect with or a resource that we can take advantage of in order to break down that barrier. So when I think about self-advocacy as a whole, it's someone that can understand what their needs are, communicate what their needs are, and ultimately it's about you deciding what it is that you want and then carrying out a plan to get it. So does being a strong self-advocate mean that you can't ask for help or have someone help you along your journey? Not at all, right? So we think about this idea of self-advocacy and everything that I just said when it comes to deciding what it is that you want out of life and then going out there and getting it. But it doesn't mean that you have to do it all alone. A lot of people believe that you have to do everything independently and you have to know exactly what the answers are. And that's simply not the case. Actually, sometimes one of the best things that you can do for yourself as a self advocate is to recognize what it is that you want, but also recognize that you may be ill equipped in some way to accomplish what you want. And so you might realize that you do need someone with some expertise or special skills by your side to guide you through a challenging process. And for example, when I started my career, I knew exactly what it was that I wanted to accomplish, but there was so much that I didn't understand. And I was simply ill equipped to understand some of the legal barriers that were standing in my way. And so that's when I first connected to Michele of the Michigan Law Center to help me accomplish what I needed in order to start my career. And I would still consider myself to be a strong self advocate, even though I needed Michele's help, because it was my responsibility to explain what my needs were to her. So it was really my job to advocate for what I wanted. I had to come to her and I had to say, this is what I want to do. I don't know how to make that happen, but I'm hoping that together we can pull some resources and figure out a plan with action steps. And using her expertise and the expertise of a few other people that I consulted was really critical to accomplishing what I needed. So, if there's anything that I want you to take away from today is that, being a self advocate does not mean that you have to do everything independently or by yourself. It's not the case at all. I often say to my clients in counseling that, don't do everything by yourself. I don't want people to have to go through the barriers and the challenges that they're facing by themselves. So, the truth in that really lies in the fact that you can't be an expert in everything. And when we have a special circumstance that requires an accommodation or a plan for our life because of a disability or a condition of some kind, we're navigating such an incredibly complex system, and we need that expert advice from multi people on a team. So whether it's structural barriers, legal barriers, systemic barriers, stigmas, stereotypes, or other challenges that can get in our way, if we try to face all of those by ourselves all the time, and if we're reluctant to ask for help, it could be really difficult or impossible to overcome some of those things, and we may not be successful. So that's why I always really try to talk about self advocacy with the idea in mind that it doesn't mean we have to do everything ourselves. And we shouldn't have to do everything ourselves. We should be able to reach out to people, whether they're professionals or friends or family or other people in our support system, so that we can utilize that support. And again, it doesn't diminish our own self-advocacy skills in any way. Just the opposite. It means that we are skilled enough to identify that we need help and that we're going to strategically find ways to get that help. So, what else does self-advocacy mean? Well, here it says that self-advocacy involves self-disclosure. So, what does this mean exactly? This means that sometimes when we're trying to self-advocate for things that we need, we may have to disclose things about our lives that can be really personal. And sometimes we don't want to disclose those things. I remember growing up through school and maybe needing an accommodation in the classroom, but feeling really insecure about talking to my teacher about that accommodation out of fear of, what will the teacher think of me? What will my classmates think? And that fear really held me back for a long time. And it wasn't until I realized that speaking up is so important that I was able to get more accommodations and really thrive and be more successful. So if you live with a disability or a learning difference or a condition that isn't quite popular or well known or easily understood by the general community of able bodied people, it might feel really scary to have to speak up and communicate about what your needs are. A lot of people struggle with this. So if you feel this way, you're definitely not alone in feeling that way. And I see that all the time when people need an accommodation, whether it's something in the classroom or in college or in their workplace, and they struggle asking for help because they don't want to feel different and they don't want to feel like they're in some way, inconveniencing someone, such as a teacher or an employer, by asking for that accommodation. And those feelings are very real and they're very valid. And I know that it can feel really hard to have to speak up and to communicate personal things about your disability or about the disability of a child or a loved one to people that maybe you don't always feel the safest talking to. And I really empathize with you on that because, like I said, I've experienced that firsthand. But what I also really want you to know and to take away from this is that your ability to thrive and to be successful and to promote positive change in your community for greater awareness and understanding of your condition and your disability, but also other people who have disabilities, that really lies in your ability to speak up. And I know speaking up sometimes is really hard. I get it. But I want to encourage you to think about what can result from speaking up. It can be really important not only for making your life easier and making sure that you get the accommodations or the services that you need to live your best life, but also for educating the person that you're speaking to and increasing their awareness that not everybody has the same needs and that your needs happen to be different. But it doesn't make you any less important or less deserving of equal access and opportunities. So think about, when you have communicated something about disability or about your limitation or condition of any type to someone, more often than not, it's an opportunity to educate them. And they're going to take away from that, realizing that there are people that live differently than they do, and that may require some different accommodations than they may have been familiar with. And I also recognize that, when we talk about speaking up and we talk about advocating for ourselves, it can feel difficult because I know this happens to me all the time. I feel really tempted to apologize for needing that accommodation or needing some service. And I really encourage you to practice being unapologetic for the accommodation that you're asking for. And I do this all the time, and it's something that I'm working on too, because the bottom line is that we shouldn't have to apologize for needing an accommodation or a resource. You shouldn't have to apologize for needing a service that can really help you overcome barriers and that can help you achieve whatever goals that you have for your life. And I think about, as a counselor, I think about, where does this come from? Why do we have such a high tendency to apologize for things that we're asking for help with? And I think it's, it really goes back to just our socialization and our social culture in the United States, where we often apologize for things even when things are not our fault. So think about how many times you've ever maybe accidentally bumped into someone and said that you're sorry, even when it wasn't your fault. And that's something that we do in our social culture, and it's considered polite and normal to do that. So it would make sense that this practice of sort of automatically apologizing can surface in our minds when we're explaining a disability or explaining an accommodation to someone else. And like I said, I see this happen all the time, and I really have to catch myself from doing it because it's so easy to fall into the trap of advocating for something that we need and then immediately apologizing for that advocacy. But the important thing to remember when we're having these conversations is, being a strong self advocate and speaking up about what your needs are in a way that really resembles that assertiveness and that self confidence without apologizing for it more often leads to success. So when we're confident and when we, express ourselves and, give rationale and reasoning for why we need that accommodation and do so in a way that doesn't sound like apologizing, that is probably going to be more successful more often. And I think that's why learning to practice being apologetic or being unapologetic is really important. So, as you're thinking about this and maybe tomorrow or next week or whenever you're in a conversation again where you have to advocate for something, whether you're on the phone with insurance or talking to an employer or, a type of therapy that you're receiving, I hope that you remember to really practice being unapologetic in those conversations. And keep in mind that you didn't ask to have a disability. Okay, it's not something that you asked for. It's not something that you wanted for yourself or for your child or for your loved one or whoever it is that has the disability. It's not something that you planned on, and it's not something that anybody can control. Because if we could control it, then we wouldn't have any disabilities at all. But the reality is that disability does exist. It's part of our reality. It's part of the human experience. But disability rights are the same as human rights. And just because a disability is part of your life that you have to manage, it doesn't mean that you don't deserve the same things that anybody else should deserve when it comes to getting accommodations or access to services. So rather than apologizing for something that is totally out of your control, practice speaking confidently about what your needs are so that you can take control over your needs and reclaim the power that you have. I know for me, getting over this really required that practice. And I would do it with my friends before I would make a tough phone call or before I would go into a new workplace and have a conversation with my employer about accommodations. I would practice that. So that's a really good skill. If you feel maybe a bit nervous or a bit unsure about how a conversation might go, I would really encourage you to practice it beforehand. So utilize your family, utilize your friends, and say, hey, can we practice this conversation so I can really have a good understanding of what I'm going to say and how I'm going to say it? And I think that can really go a long way in helping you feel more prepared when entering these types of conversations. So, next slide, Lizzie. One last thing that I want to mention before we move on to the next subject here about what self-advocacy means. So, self-advocacy means that sometimes we may be faced with opposition, right? Because it's really hard to be a self-advocate all the time. And sometimes we may interact with people who are incredibly supportive and incredibly understanding. And I've had that happen to me, and it's just like coming up for fresh air. It's wonderful when we meet these people that are just really accommodating and who have a lot of education and training on disability inclusion, and that makes our lives really easy and wonderful. But sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes being a strong self advocate means that we do have to experience some difficult conversations with people of authority. And gosh, like that can be really hard to face. A lot of people, whether you have a disability or not, really struggle with having those difficult conversations with people of authority because of that power difference that exists. I think, anytime we're talking to someone with more authority than ourselves, it can feel really intimidating and pretty challenging to stand up to that person and to speak confidently or assertively about what your needs are. But being a strong self advocate means that we have to cope with that distress and tolerate that discomfort so that we can push forward and remain dedicated to our goals. So, what does that look like? For example, sometimes you might be advocating for an accommodation. So let's say you're in a classroom and you're advocating for an accommodation, and maybe you've had repeated conversations with the teacher and you're just not seeing results. And I know it's summertime right now, so this may be hard to imagine. But if you've ever been in a classroom and you're really trying to get an accommodation to help you succeed academically, and you're just not seeing results, the teacher or the other educator, professional of any type is just not listening or not hearing you out, that can be really frustrating. I know that can feel like you're being dismissed, or it could feel like, you're putting in all this effort and you maybe just feel like giving up because you're not getting the results that you want. And that type of opposition can be really difficult and it can make a lot of people feel powerless. And I empathize with that because I've been there. I've had to have these conversations with people when it came to my study abroad in college or different jobs that I've had. And, I'm asking for accommodations. And I think I'm being very reasonable and I provide good rationale, but the people that I'm working with just don't really understand. And that's been really disheartening for me. And it can feel like your power is being diminished. Um, but what I've learned over the years of my life and what I try to teach others now is that having really good coping skills comes directly into play here. And it's about being resilient. And so, what I want you to think about if you've ever faced this type of opposition, or if you face it in the future, is how can I take care of myself in this moment? How can I deal with this discomfort? How can I cope with this feeling of powerlessness or feeling of, disappointment? How can I deal with these negative feelings? How can I remain confident about what it is that I want to accomplish without allowing this other person or this opposition to make me feel powerless? And I know that's a big task to accomplish. I know that that takes a lot of practice, and I know it's not easy to let those things go and to remain committed to something, especially if you don't have a lot of experience facing opposition. I think this is really hard for kids and young adults because maybe they haven't had a lot of experience facing opposition or difficult conversations, but it's something that anybody can practice at any age. And I think we should all practice it in our lives because the truth is, opposition is inevitable. And rather than backing down or giving up and settling for less than what we want or deserve, the better alternative really is just pushing forward. So this might mean that you take a break. Maybe you take a few days off to recenter and refocus and just sort of give yourself a mindset break from that opposition and then come up with a better plan for attacking it head on in a different way. Maybe this means that you work with a counselor on strengthening some of your coping skills and learning how to be a bit more assertive. Maybe this means that you focus on your own self-care for a bit and then consult an expert or consult someone else who has already achieved what it is that you want to achieve. I think, in the disability community, peer support can really come into play here. So if you're trying to, accomplish something and you just continue to face opposition and you continue to face brick walls, maybe you want to reach out to someone that has a similar limitation as you, but was able to do it. I know for myself, when I wanted to go live independently at college or when I wanted to travel, I never would have been able to do any of those things if I had not connected with other people who have muscular dystrophy like I do and who use power wheelchairs like I do. I never would have been able to be successful and to remain strong in my self advocacy skills if I didn't have those peers to lean on. So sometimes when I would face a big barrier and I just would have opposition from people that I wanted to get an accommodation from, I would call one of my friends or I would call someone that would really understand. And I would say, listen, like, I really want this to happen and I just don't see how this is going to happen. And usually by reaching out to those people, they would be able to give me some really good advice or help me come up with a new game plan for moving forward. And I think that all comes down to self-care and having a strong support system and working with people that can help you explore what your next steps are. So, thinking back to that example I gave, if you're in a classroom and you've been talking to a teacher for a while and you're just not seeing results, maybe the next step is to have a conversation with the school principal. Or maybe you decide to bring in another person to the classroom, like your husband or wife or partner or someone else that can stand by your side and say, we've been talking about this for a while, and now I'm just, getting input from other people, and we all feel like it's an issue. Maybe that would be helpful in making your voice a bit louder. There are usually many things that can be done if you feel like you're not being heard by someone, whether that's going to another person, like the principal in the school example, or bringing in another expert, or presenting the information in a different way. Very rarely the solution is to give up. There are very rare circumstances when the only answer is giving up. And there's almost always something that can be done. And I really feel strongly about this. Sometimes we feel like we have done everything that we can possibly do, and it feels like we hit a brick wall and there's nothing more that we can do. And I know that's hard. I've been there before. And sometimes I have had to adjust what my goals are. Sometimes I've had to say to myself, okay, I really want this to happen, but I'm going to have to compromise a little bit on what my goal is. But I didn't give up. If I had to adjust what the goal is, or if I had to modify what it was that I wanted to accomplish, I did it in a way that still allowed me to see success, or that still allowed me to benefit from the experience in some way, and that still allowed me to educate people about the accommodation or the arrangement that was going to work for me. So I really encourage you to take some time and brainstorm, connect with other people who are in your situation, consult with counselors, consult with other professionals, and really dig deep to ask yourself, what other avenues can I explore and what other alternatives might there be? And just, going back to this idea of reaching out to the disability community, nowadays with technology, that is much more possible and available and accessible for us than in the past. So even in the last 10 years, we have seen Facebook groups just grow and grow and grow. And now you could probably find a Facebook group for whatever type of disability that you have. Personally, I'm in a Facebook group called Living with Muscular Dystrophy, and it has thousands of other people that have muscular dystrophy. I know other people that have dyslexia, and there's Facebook groups or other types of online communities for people with dyslexia or for someone with a chronic health condition or autism or other types of limitations. And certainly many online groups out there for people that struggle with mental health conditions. So that's the type of community that is available to you. A lot of people are really quick to say, well, I don't know anybody else that uses a wheelchair, or I don't know anybody else that has ADHD the way that I do, or that has, a chronic health condition or a neurotypical difference the way that you do. But now with the online communities that are out there, chances are you will be able to find other people, even if you don't see them all the time in person. We have things like Skype and FaceTime and Zoom, and even if it's just over texting or having phone calls, you can reach out to other people that have accomplished things with the disability or the limitation that you have, and you can get advice from them. And I think that that has really helped me in many different ways. And I think it can really go a long way for others too. But ultimately, don't give up. There's always an alternative or something else that can be explored. So, those were some of my thoughts on what self advocacy means. And I hope that you're able to take away that self advocacy means really speaking up for yourself, deciding what it is that you want to accomplish, and exploring the alternatives and figuring out the ways that you can feel confident in what it is that you're asking for. But when we think about building self advocacy skills, there are many different approaches that you may take. So you may have learned strategies for building self-advocacy skills from other speakers, books, or articles online, and those are all great because really the truth is there isn't just one way to work on self-advocacy skills. And that's what I'm going to move into now in this part of the presentation. But what I want you to remember is that, there are so many different skills that can tie into self-advocacy, and you have to do what works for you. You have to find the skills and the ways to approach things that you're the most comfortable with. No two people are exactly alike, and no two disabilities are exactly alike. There's actually a pretty common quote that I love, and it goes like this. It says, if you have met one person with a disability, you've met one person with a disability. And what that really translates to mean is that, just because you know one person with a disability, that means you just know that one person. It doesn't mean that you know things about every person with a disability, even if it's another person with the exact same diagnosis as you. The presenting, concerns or the goals that they have for their life could be very different. So, with that in mind, no two life experiences with self advocacy will look exactly alike. The way that one person defines themselves as a self advocate may look very different from the way that another person defines themselves. And so we'll move into this, and the following are just some things that I have found to be true in my own experiences. So these are some skills that have really worked well for me, but I encourage you to tailor this to what works for you. So you may pick up some bits and pieces of what I say about, these skills for self-advocacy, but you may also add in a lot of your own ideas, and that's perfect. I want you to ultimately create your own map for what figuring out what self-advocacy really looks like for you. So I like to start by talking about self-awareness. So, self awareness is the ability for you to clearly know who you are, to know what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, what you can do really well, what you may need to work on, what you like, what you don't like, how you communicate, how you interact best with people, what makes you happy and what does not make you happy. All of these things tie into your self-awareness. And I know this may seem like a really simple concept. We think about self-awareness, self-discovery, just understanding who you are as a person. But actually, a lot of people really struggle to know themselves and to have a firm understanding of their own identity. I see this all the time when I work with clients in counseling. A lot of people come in and they say, "Well, I think I know what I want, but I don't know what my strengths are to help me get there, or I don't know what my skills are. I don't know what I can do really well." And so we'll talk about that and we'll figure out like what are your strengths and how can we incorporate that into your self-advocacy skills. So how do we build self-awareness? When we talk about self-awareness and people affected by disabilities, some questions to ask yourself might be, what does my disability mean to me? What are my beliefs about people with disabilities? How do I relate or not relate to stereotypes about people with disabilities in the world? What are my values as a person with a disability? How much or how little does my disability impact who I am? How do I communicate or advocate about my disability? Have I done this in the past? Or is this really new to me? What are my needs? All of these questions and all of these answers would contribute to a person's self awareness. And this is really important for self advocacy because in order to actually be a self advocate and advocate and communicate and publicly speak about what it is that you need from your life or what it is that you need from other people to accomplish your goals, you've got to have a good understanding of what your needs are so that you can actually speak in ways that are clear and logical and that show people that you very clearly understand what your needs are. So if you feel like maybe you don't have that much experience talking about what your needs are, I would really encourage you to reflect on some of these questions. You may want to try journaling about it on paper, or sometimes for kids, drawing pictures about what their needs are can be really helpful. And there's so many different ways that you can work on answering these questions or work on increasing your self-awareness. And if you find yourself needing help to do this, or if the process of figuring out what your disability needs are is bringing up a lot of negative feelings, working with a counselor could be a really good option for you to explore some of these things in a safe way. But ultimately, I think, being a good self advocate kind of necessitates having self awareness. So, really understanding what your needs are before you enter a conversation where you're going to be asking for an accommodation. So, I'll give you an example. For me, when I was transitioning to college, I really had to think about what I was going to need in college. And it was new for me because I had never been to college before, obviously. And I had a good understanding of what my needs were in high school or in middle school growing up. I knew that I needed, some classroom accommodations. I knew that I needed a personal care assistant to help me with things during the day that I needed help with. But going to college, that was a whole new thing for me. And I didn't know what my needs were. I really had to research that and think about it. And I would call different colleges and universities and I would say, in the beginning I would say, "Hi, I'm wondering if your campus is accessible for me." And they would say, "Well, what do you mean by accessible? What are your needs?" And I would say, "I'm not really sure. What are my needs?" And so you could see how that probably didn't end very well because I didn't have a clear understanding of what I needed. And so before I made the next phone call to a college or university, I had to really think about, okay, what are my needs? What are some of the things that I'm going to need in college? And I had to talk to other people who were using power wheelchairs like me that were in college. I had to start thinking about these types of things. And it was a little bit difficult, but going through that experience of becoming more self aware about what my limitations were was ultimately empowering for me. Because the next time I was able to communicate with a college or university, I was able to say, okay, clearly I know what I need. I need to have a dorm room that has a roll-in shower. I need to have classrooms that are within close walking distance from my dorm. I need to have transportation to get to the community. I need to have personal care assistants. So you can see the difference, right? When I first was exploring college, I just had no idea how to even determine or define what my needs were. But after reflecting on that self awareness and really doing my research, I was much more clear on what I needed. And that was very helpful for me to be successful because then the college advisors had a good understanding of what my needs were and they were able to give me the information that I needed. So, then after self awareness, we're going to move on to the next skill that I believe is really important for becoming a strong self advocate, developing a vision. So, to develop a vision, you might use a lot of different strategies. So, you might start by journaling some thoughts on paper or maybe creating a vision board with pictures of what it is that you want to achieve, working with a counselor, maybe working with a teacher or a family member to discover what my goals are, what are my dreams. Talking with family or friends who know you best is a really good way to start that if you're not sure what it is that you want to accomplish, or any other number of ways that you can engage in to flesh out what your overall vision is. But this is really important because if you don't have a vision for what it is that you're trying to accomplish, it would make sense that it would be very difficult to move forward as a self advocate. And so in my example, I knew that I wanted to go to a university. I knew I wanted to go to a 4-year university setting. So that was my vision. But I've also had other visions in my life, such as, I really want to explore adaptive recreation, or I really want to be able to study abroad somewhere, for at least 3 weeks in the summer. Fleshing out that goal. It wasn't just I wanted to travel. It was, I want to be able to do a 3-week program in the summer. So having that clear understanding of the objective has always made it easier for me. In cases of my life when I have been a little more fuzzy on what the vision is, that's been more difficult for me because when I'm not clear on what that vision is, it's really hard for me to break down that vision into tangible, actionable steps that I can take, and that's ultimately what you want to be able to do. You want to be able to have that vision so that you can build your rationale, explore why it's so important, and be able to communicate that to other people. So developing a vision is very important for self-advocacy. Next, we have acknowledging obstacles. So along with developing a vision, it's really important to acknowledge the barriers that exist. This is a skill that can be useful for anybody, regardless of disability, because when we're blinded to the barriers that exist in front of us, it can certainly make them much more difficult to overcome. And what I often notice is that talking about disability barriers can be really difficult for people, and they can find themselves wanting to only focus on the positives. So they may sugarcoat things or put a positive spin on something. And I often see this happening when kids are involved. And I get it, it can be really hard to have a conversation about obstacles with kids or with people in general because sometimes we don't want to acknowledge disability barriers because that can bring up a lot of sadness or a lot of negative feelings. And I've been there. It definitely was difficult for me growing up, having to really have it right in front of my face that I would never be able to do this or I would never be able to do that. And that's just something that I had to work through. And what I really have found to be true over the years of experience that I have had helping people and families affected by disabilities is that ignoring obstacles doesn't make them go away, just like ignoring our emotions doesn't make them go away. As a therapist, what I know to be true is that acknowledging our feelings and managing our feelings openly by talking about them really allows us to have more control over them, and it allows us to not be dominated by those feelings. And the same is true for these obstacles. So if we're able to talk about the barriers that exist in our lives, whether it's, I'm never going to be able to drive, or I'm never going to be able to physically take care of myself. I'm always going to need to have caregiving assistance. No matter what obstacles that you have in your life, acknowledging these things will help you be a stronger self-advocate, because then you'll be able to take control over them, explore them fully, understand them inside and out, and come up with ways to work around them so that you can accomplish your goals. So, acknowledging obstacles really means that we must have honest, open conversations about the things that are standing in our way. And I know this can feel really difficult. No one said that self advocacy would be easy all the time. I know that it can be difficult, especially if you're not used to talking about those things. But I hope that you can remind yourself that acknowledging those barriers will really help you strengthen your ability to overcome them. So, another skill for becoming a strong self advocate is your ability to utilize your strengths. Every single person has unique strengths that can help them succeed, regardless of disability, learning difference, medical condition, or other type of limitation. I know personally that for a lot of people, sometimes it can feel really hard to know what your strengths are, especially if you're a child or a young adult. I know for me, when I was younger, I used to think all the time, well, I'm not really sure what my strengths are, but I promise you that you do have strengths. And you do have things about yourself that you can utilize to be a powerful self advocate. And if you're struggling to know what your strengths are, you may find it to be helpful to talk with some of your family and friends who know you best so that you can reflect on feedback that they give you, or feedback from a teacher, or from a mentor, or from anybody that knows you well, or even work with a counselor to help discover what some of your strengths are. And what I've really noticed with this one, especially, is that engaging in this type of reflection, you might realize things about yourself that you'd never even expected. You might realize that you have very strong writing skills or speaking skills, or maybe you're really good at adapting to situations and you can utilize some of your adaptation skills to overcome some barriers. Or maybe you're really good at relating to people. Maybe you're really good at de escalating conflicts when they arise, and you can really use that when you're a self advocate. Or maybe another example that I can just think of now is maybe you discover that you're really good at bringing people together, spreading the word, organizing people within a community to fight for something. This can really go a long way in your efforts to self advocate. So it doesn't matter what your strength is, there are numerous strengths that are inside of people, and no matter what they are, you can find ways to bring them into the picture when you are in the role of a self advocate. It's like I said earlier, self advocacy is going to look different for everybody. The way that I advocate for myself might be different from the way that you advocate for yourself. I'm usually really eager to just pick up the phone and call someone and explain my story. But for other people, they're just as successful really carefully crafting a letter about, the rationale for why they need what they need. And maybe their skills lie in writing letters and emailing people and sending letters out. Whereas for me, I really feel like I'm stronger on the phone. So it doesn't matter what your strengths are. We all have different strengths and we all have different skills, and they can all be contributing to the role of a self advocate. So, to review, building self advocacy skills can involve a lot of different things. But in my life, and when I have helped people with disabilities, I have really found that having self awareness, developing your vision, acknowledging your obstacles, and utilizing your strengths can be especially helpful as you work on self advocacy. So, those are the 4 things that I really believe in. But like I said, there may be many other self-advocacy skills that can come into the picture as well. So finally, I just want to share a little bit about why self-advocacy is so important and why this relates to positive mental health. Because I am a therapist, it's my passion. I really care about the mental health of people, and I think that really is connected to self-advocacy. So, first and foremost, self advocacy is really important because it allows you to be the expert on your own life. The truth is, you're your own best advocate. So it doesn't matter how many other people of authority, whether they are your teachers or your doctors or nonprofit leaders or insurance providers, it doesn't matter all of these other people that may be speaking for you. The truth is, you are your own best advocate. We are fortunate to have a lot of organizations in our community that aim to advocate for people and families affected by disabilities. And I love that. I love that we have so many groups in our community that want to be strong advocates and that have professional careers in advocacy. But I really encourage you to be your own best advocate because nobody knows your life and your needs better than you. You know your life and what your needs are better than your teachers, doctors, social workers, counselors, lawyers, or any other type of advocate. So, as a therapist, I specialize in working with people and families affected by disabilities. But the number one thing that I always say in the beginning of working with someone is that I don't have all the magic answers, and I don't claim to be the expert on disability, especially as it relates to your individual life. Even if I'm working with someone that has muscular dystrophy or a muscular condition like I do, or who has been using a wheelchair like me, I still always make a point to emphasize that I don't have all the answers, and you are your own best advocate. Self-advocacy is so important because it gives you a platform to be heard. So this is another just really important part about self-advocacy. Your voice is what matters, and it's really what matters most because it's your life. And I want you to be able to self-advocate so that you can decide for yourself exactly what you want your life to look like. Self-advocacy is also important for people to understand and learn about because it is a continual learning process. So, self-advocacy skills isn't something that you just master right away and then never have to work on again. That's not how it works. It's always a continual process. Every single person, regardless of the amount of experience that they may have with advocacy, can always learn more about that process and can always improve in their self advocacy skills. And that's because it's a wide spectrum, right? So if we think about a spectrum of skills and abilities, some people may have been advocating for themselves their entire lives. And for other people, this may be a really, really new concept on the other side of the spectrum. But the important thing to remember is that you can always strengthen your skills. You can always learn more about yourself, learn more about the barriers that you face, Learn more about what your needs are, and you can always lead by example for other people who are working on their self-advocacy skills. So for me, especially, I have been able to overcome a lot in my life, but I'm still learning every single day. Every time I have a new conversation with someone where I have to explain why I'm in a wheelchair or what my needs are, I'm still learning. I'm still learning how to talk about disability. I'm still learning how to express what my needs are, especially because my needs are changing all the time. As humans, we evolve over time. Your needs for a specific disability might have always been one way, but as you grow up and graduate from high school and start, living your adult life, your needs might change. And so it's a continual learning process. And I think that just really goes a long way to remember that it's never ending and it's something that you can always work on. So next, I've touched on this before, but I'll say it again here. Self-advocacy is important because it is about taking control of your life. It's about having your voice heard. It's about empowering yourself so that you can be in control of your life. And what I really love about self-advocacy is that it eliminates the possibility of other people speaking over you or speaking for you who may not fully understand you or what your needs are. And self advocacy really allows people to live up to their own expectations. I'm really always talking about this with my clients. What are your expectations for your life rather than the expectations of other people? And I like self advocacy because it allows you to be more included in the world, access the opportunities that you want to access, obtain the resources that you need to maximize your health or your education or your independence or your employment goals. Ultimately, self advocacy allows people to really live their best lives. And if you haven't figured out this already, on the next slide, I'll say self-advocacy can really lead to positive mental health for all of these reasons. So in the mental health field, I know that people have better psychological health when they feel in control of their lives. That's something that's been studied and proven, and it's in the research. People are generally happier and have better mental health when they feel in control and when they have self-awareness and when they know what their strengths are, and when they can express their wants and needs, and when they can develop a vision for what they want and then successfully achieve it, and when they feel like they're living their best lives. So, just the opposite, feeling like you don't have control, feeling like you're not getting the things that you need, maybe feeling like you're being treated unfairly, or like you're being denied resources or access to opportunities, or in general, just feeling like your voice isn't being heard, that often leads to anxiety and depression and poor mental health. And that's why I'm really passionate about self advocacy, because your life matters. And I want you to live your best life. Next slide here. Your life matters. And I really do mean that. Thank you so much for listening to this presentation. I do just want to make sure that we have time for questions. Again, I'm so grateful to the Michigan Law Center for allowing me to do this. And I hope that we'll have some good questions here.
Thanks, Lauren. That was really wonderful. I have some questions for you, and so just a couple of instructions for people. So in your dashboard, there's a GoToWebinar control panel, and you'll see a couple things. One is there's a little arrow that points right that says questions, and it's in a little gray cell. If you click on the arrow, it'll turn downward, and that's where you can enter your questions. You can do it so that everyone can see your question, or you can send it privately so that if you want to stay, if you're a little shy, that's okay. Or this is a great chance to really try out the self-advocacy and be proud and ask your question. But if you're either way, it doesn't matter. If you have a question, now's a great time to use that chat function, the question bar, and ask Lauren your questions. So please feel free, while you're thinking of those questions, go ahead and enter them in now. And then in the meantime, you'll also see there are handouts. And so if you look further down the dashboard, you'll see handouts 5 out of 5. And again, if you'll click the right arrow, then you'll see them pop down. And so you can double click on each one of those and you'll be able to download those. Those are downloadable PDFs. So one of them is a little bit more about my biography, so you can learn a little bit about me. There's also Lauren's more full biography, so you can see more details on her background and where she came from and how she came to be so prolific, and the background on education, her experience. There's also some information about the law firm and the full scope of services that we offer. There's also an article that I wrote for the State Bar Journal on planning for people with disabilities. So if you or your family are looking at what to do, what kind of planning needs to take place, that's a great article on that. And then one of the things that I'm most proud about is the Unsung Hero Award that I won from the State Bar. So there's a little information about that. And I do see a question first from Nate. He wants to have some tips on having that difficult conversation, or just a conversation. Should you really role play this out before you have that conversation? And how do you choose who to role play that with?
Sure, yeah. So I think it depends on the person. If you're someone that likes to feel really prepared before going into a conversation, I think role play is a really good skill and a really good tool that you can use. For other people that are maybe a bit shy about role play, another strategy might just be making a list of your rationale points, maybe getting out a piece of paper and writing down, okay, I'm going to have this conversation. Here are my main bullet points that I want to get across to this person, and write down what it is exactly that you're hoping to take away from that conversation. So whether you do a role play with someone, whether you just write it out on a piece of paper, or whether you practice it in another way, I think there is a lot of value to preparing. I think sometimes when we enter a conversation and we're not really sure what we're trying to get out of the conversation, it can feel like we're being a bit steamrolled, especially if the other person maybe isn't really 100% eager and willing to help us. They may just want to take the easy way out and just say, oh, yeah, that's just how it is, and then it can feel like, oh, no, now I'm frozen. Now I don't even know what to say to that. So I think having a role play, or having, at least a piece of paper where you can plan out what it is that you want to say could be a really useful thing. And your question about, who would you have that role play with? I would encourage you to think about the people in your life that you trust most, or the people that you feel 100% safe with, but also someone that is willing to challenge what you say. And you might even say to that person, let's say it's, a sibling or someone in your family, you might say, okay, I'll use Kelly, my sister. I might say, okay, Kelly, I'm going to be, coming to you with my request for this accommodation. I really want you to first tell me that's not possible, and then tell me that you don't understand why it's needed, and then tell me that you're having a hard time understanding. So I'm kind of giving Kelly, my sister, this framework of, I want you to challenge me so that I can practice how I would respond if I am presented with that opposition. Because if we choose to role play with someone that's just going to say, oh, yeah, sure, absolutely, whatever you need, we'll take care of it, that may not be realistic for how the real conversation is going to go. So although it can feel difficult role playing, I would imagine that you'd rather have a role play go badly than the real conversation go badly. So I do think that role play with someone that you trust, and someone that really knows you, and someone that isn't afraid to challenge you a little bit, can be a really good practice tool. I hope that makes
That's
sense.
great, Lauren. That's fantastic. Donna has actually kind of a follow-up to that, which is um, in working with young people with disabilities, and maybe they don't feel comfortable talking to their parents about what their needs are. Um, and from a professional or a counselor's point of view, like, what do you do? Where do you tell them to go? Is it time for them, that person, to ask their family to arrange for counseling? So they, that can be a very difficult conversation. So, um,
Yeah.
how do you tackle that? Or if you're a person with disabilities and you really want to talk to somebody, but it's not your parent, you don't feel comfortable,
Yeah.
and there are many reasons for that. How do you approach that, or what are your suggestions?
Yeah, so for kids or people in general who have disabilities that really want to work on this or want to work with a counselor but don't feel comfortable with, admitting that to their parents, that's really tough and that's really heartbreaking because if you're a minor, you typically have to disclose to your parents, especially if you're using their insurance, that you want to go talk to a counselor. Sometimes an easier avenue for the child or that person is to talk to a teacher or someone that they trust in school and say, I really think that I want to go to counseling. Is there a school social worker that I can talk to? Every school has school social workers, so maybe they're not quite ready to tell their parents that they want to go to a counselor, but maybe there's someone else within the school, whether it's a teacher's aide or the teacher or a school social worker, and then maybe that social worker can sort of advocate with the student or with that person to bring it up to their parents in a safe way. And I think it's important to remember that you don't have to tell your parents everything about your counseling. I'm hoping that, there may be a way that you could say, hey, I think it's a really good idea for people to go to counseling. And I think it's something that I want to try out. Now, that doesn't mean that you're disclosing why you want to go or the content of why you want to go talk to someone, because all of that should be protected between the person and the therapist receiving treatment in that confidential dynamic. But yeah, I guess the biggest thing there would just be to try to navigate the conversation in a way that feels safe to you, that protects your privacy with your parent, but ultimately gets you to where you want to be. And I think that would be a good way to practice some of this advocacy too, is just letting your parents know that that you do want to talk to a counselor. You could even say, as some of my friends go to counseling, I really just want to try it out. And then that may be an easier way to bring it up to your parents rather than saying, hey, I'm feeling really depressed. I think I need help. Maybe you just want to say it a little bit differently. So maybe role play with some friends over, how you could bring it up in a safe way.
I think that's some really great suggestions. So, there's also a request, um, for some reading materials and suggestions. And there's a great book that I read called Crucial Conversations, Tools for Talking When Stakes Are High. And it's by Stephen Covey, Covey. And that's good just in general. And they're good skill building for ourselves, just for our own well-being, as well as,
Mhm,
especially when you're advocating and for yourself. And it doesn't really matter if it's a person with disabilities or without
mhm.
disabilities. And so it's a great resource. But is there a resource that you recommend, Lauren, for maybe for young people who really want to take this on and learn more and want to be more independent?
That's a really good question. I don't have the name of a book that I would recommend specifically right now. But now with kids on technology, I would encourage you to even just Google, how do I talk to my parents about counseling? I don't have the name of a book in mind, but I know that there are lots of resources online that kids may find kid-friendly articles. You could go on websites for kids' health, and depending on the age, if it's age appropriate, kidshealth.org is a really good kid-friendly health website. It has articles and resources for, how the body works, what is puberty, what does it mean to grow up healthy, and then there's a whole section on emotional health, and it just says, what are our emotions? What does that really mean? And how do I talk to my parents about, wanting to go to counseling? So whether it's at kidshealth.org or another similar website, I know that there's a lot out there online for kids, and it's usually written in a very kid-friendly way.
That's great. That's great advice. As a parent of a child with disabilities, I think one of the scariest things that I have to do is allow her the room to be a self-advocate.
Mm,
And I think that's true for most parents. I think it's hard to give your child sometimes the room that they need. Um, and so, what are your top tips, maybe, to parents to allow that transition? Because at first you
sure.
have to be the advocate, no matter what. Like they're too little, they're too
Yep.
young, especially.
Yep.
And then, at what point do you start to kind of let that go a little bit? Where does it start in the classroom, where they have to ask the teacher? What's your best advice for like when that should start to happen and what that might look like?
Sure. Well, I think including kids in their individual education plans, their IEPs in the school system as early as you feel is age appropriate is a really good idea. So they may be sitting in on the first meeting, maybe fifth grade, sixth grade, depending on, age 11, 12, 13, maybe depending on what you feel is appropriate. And maybe they're not participating fully in those first few years of sitting in on those meetings. But then as time goes on, I would really start encouraging your child to say, or, saying things to your child like, hey, when we have those meetings, do you think that there's anything else that you would want to bring up in those meetings? Or do you think that, you have everything that you need at school? I think asking questions to your child is so important because it gives them a voice. So don't be afraid to ask those questions to your kids and say, hey, do you feel like you have everything that you need? Is there a challenge that you're going through at school? Are you struggling in any ways? I think sometimes it's really easy for parents to want to just continue to be in that advocate role for a long time, and it's so hard to let go. I know it is. I know it was for my parents too. But I think giving your child a voice whenever you can, whether it starts early when they're 8, 9, or 10, and then as they go into the teenage years, just continue asking them questions. Don't have conversations with them without them. I just feel like, having conversations about them and their needs when they're not even in the room with you is not going to promote their self-advocacy. I always like to say, don't do anything without that person. Bring them into the conversation, even if they're passive, even if they're just listening and not really sure what's right or what's not right. Just expose them to those conversations early and use language like, we just want to make sure that you have everything that you need to be successful, and be affirming. Say, we want to make sure that you get to maximize your potential because you have so much potential and you have strengths, and just really be affirming on what their goals and dreams can be. I think for me growing up, a big barrier that really impeded or hindered my self advocacy skills was that sometimes I didn't even know that I had potential in certain ways. And that was really damaging because I wasn't even sure, would I be able to go to college, or would I be able to travel? Would I be able to have a career? And that's not to say that, my parents did anything wrong or anybody did anything wrong, but I think it just taught me that being extra affirming can be really helpful. So be affirming. Don't be afraid to let go. Really remind your children of the potential that they have. Expose them to those meetings and those conversations whenever you can, and ask them questions. Involve them in the conversation and give them room to speak up.
Okay. I have a question from Stephanie. And her question said, how can we convince young people that self-advocacy isn't inherently disrespectful? Working with young people, I hear, I don't want to be disrespectful. And I think that's really interesting because what I'm hearing is, and maybe I'm not hearing this correctly, but I'm hearing shame in that,
Yeah.
where people are ashamed. So are you hearing the same thing? Or, I mean, what's your reaction to that, Lauren?
Yeah, I do feel a little bit of shame in that. I also feel like maybe the fear of speaking up could be fear of inconveniencing someone or being a burden to someone or, having someone plan everything around them or, I think that that really relates to shame. And I think we have to work on accusing language and turn it into assertive language because there's a big difference between being very accusing and saying, I want this, to being assertive and saying, I just need this because it will help me succeed better. Or I think I just need this because it'll help me be more productive in the classroom, or it will help me with my homework better, or it'll help me in some way. I think that people that are afraid to self advocate, like you said, it could be coming from a place of shame or it could be coming from that fear of, well, I don't want to accuse them of anything, or I don't want to sound like I'm being rude. But I think there definitely is a way to be assertive and be polite at the same time. You don't have to please everybody. You don't have to apologize to everybody. You don't have to sacrifice your own needs because of wanting to be polite or wanting to be, passive or complacent. Most of the time, people will appreciate you speaking up, at least in my experience, because sometimes teachers or employers just don't know what they don't know. And so speaking up and saying, I think I really need to have this accommodation in the classroom because I've been struggling in this way, and having this accommodation I think will really help me. I think in most cases, the teacher or the person might respond with, oh, I didn't even know that. Thanks for letting me know. So I think it's just important to remind young people and remind kids that it's not accusatory and it's not coming from a place of negativity when you speak up for yourself, but it's coming from a place of positive assertiveness and being confident in yourself so that you don't have to sacrifice what your needs are.
And I can't help but put my lawyer hat on. And if it's a school, a child who's in school, it's the law. So they have
Yeah.
to accommodate. And so if you need help, and there are particular people who do specialize in IEP advocacy. And one of the things that I did when my children were young is that I wanted to be able, I'm a special needs attorney, but I wanted to be able to attend IEPs as a parent and advocate and not as the lawyer. And so I became a member of the Arc of Macomb, and as a benefit of membership, you do get an IEP advocate, and that can now, well, it's a little weird because of the whole, availability. School is technically out, and so it's something that you really have to be able to make sure that you have your ducks in a row for the fall. And who knows what's
Mhm.
going to happen with accommodations under the circumstances, but if you need help advocating, this is for parents too. Make sure that you get the, ask for the help that you need. You're not in this alone. And as you grow up, I guess I love your idea though, Lauren, too, of making sure, it's the child is present, but I think what's important too is to not talk around that person,
Sure.
um, but to address them as much as possible and um, take pauses and allow them to, ask their opinion, ask them questions. And they, like you said, if they don't answer, that's totally okay. But it might be something that you talk about at home. And you're right. I love your idea of slowly kind of transitioning to that, where they're really, you're at least inviting them to the table and inviting their opinion because it matters. It's all about them. Um, so I really like
Absolutely.
the whole presentation is really about empowerment. And So I love that, and I love the no apologies aspect of this. Like, you're right, you didn't choose this. This just happened, and
Mhm.
but and I'm not going to apologize for it. This is just who I am, and really, disability is natural. There
Mhm.
are everybody that is on this webinar, everybody that will ever see this webinar, I guarantee knows somebody with a disability, and it may
Yeah.
be themselves. So I really love everything that you've had to say here, and I think it's just so valuable. Um, I have to
Thank
ask you
you.
one thing, because some of the people on this call are going to want to get in touch with you, and if they need counseling or they know someone that could use your help, how do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Michelle. I really appreciate your kind words, and I love what you contributed as well with the idea of not talking around someone. I think that's so important. But yes, absolutely. I would be more than happy to communicate, touch base, have a conversation with anybody listening to this recording. So if you would like, you can email me at this address listed on the website. I'm sorry, on the slide here.